Welcome to today's deep dive. And if you are listening to this right now, we really created this specifically for you. Because if you're navigating the fertility space, you are probably just completely overwhelmed by the sheer amount of noise out there.
Oh, absolutely. It's a barrage of contradictory advice everywhere you look.
Right. So our mission today is to cut through all of that. We're looking at some really specific, actionable, clinical insights from the Berkeley Center for Reproductive Wellness. And the goal is to decode the exact nutritional foundations you need to actually optimize your reproductive health.
And we are talking about doing this at the cellular level because, things like IVF and advanced treatments, they get all the headlines, right?
The miraculous medical interventions.
Exactly. But true fertility success, it fundamentally starts way down at the microscopic level. You can't just build a strong foundation with low-quality materials.
Okay, let's unpack this because I think people
Right.
usually think about reproductive medicine like, I don't know, plumbing or architecture.
Yeah, checking if the fallopian tubes are clear or if the uterine structure is sound. Ultrasounds, measuring fluids, all of that macro stuff.
Right, but you're saying that lens is missing the invisible roadblocks.
Completely. The real roadblocks are happening down in the cellular energy and the chemical signaling.
So let's talk about the cornerstone of all this, which is the egg itself, the oocyte. I read that the human egg is literally the largest single cell in the entire human body.
It is. It's absolutely massive compared to pretty much everything else microscopic floating around in us.
Which means it requires an astronomical amount of energy just to survive, right?
Yeah.
I try to visualize the human egg as like an ultra-high-performance smartphone.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, it's like it's running a million background processes, the screen brightness is maxed out, and the battery drains incredibly fast. Because once that egg is fertilized, the amount of work it has to do is just staggering.
Well, what's fascinating here is that the physical force required for that single cell to divide into 2, and then 4, and then 8. It requires a massive reserve of ATP.
And ATP is the basic unit of cellular energy, right?
Right, exactly. And the sole source of that ATP is the egg's mitochondria. They are the cellular batteries.
But those batteries can start to die.
Yeah, as a woman ages or, in cases of diminished ovarian reserve, those mitochondria begin to lose their structural integrity. They just become really inefficient at holding a charge.
Which brings us to the very first major nutritional intervention for the Berkeley Center text, which is coenzyme Q10, or ubiquinol, the active form.
Right, ubiquinol is much more bioavailable.
So if the mitochondria are the batteries, CoQ10 is essentially the high-speed charging cable.
Yeah, and it's important to understand how it actually does that. CoQ10 acts directly inside the electron transport chain of the mitochondria. It literally shuttles electrons back and forth to generate that ATP.
Wow, okay, so it's directly increasing the cell's capacity to produce its own energy.
Exactly. But there's a catch. When a cell produces all that energy, it inevitably generates exhaust.
Right, oxidative stress,
Right.
free radicals.
Yeah. And free radicals are basically unstable molecules missing an electron. So they will violently steal an electron from anything nearby.
And in an egg cell, they steal it from the DNA.
Yes, which causes DNA fragmentation, and that leads to poor embryo development or chromosomal abnormalities. But CoQ10 neutralizes that exhaust. It acts as an electron donor, so it satisfies those free radicals before they can damage the genetic material.
That's huge. And the clinical outcomes they highlight are pretty hard to ignore. We're looking at improved egg quantity and quality during IVF, better embryo development, and higher pregnancy rates.
Especially for women over 35 or those with diminished ovarian reserve, because, numbers alone don't guarantee a baby.
Right, having a high follicle count doesn't mean much if the eggs don't have the energy to divide.
Exactly. It's about the biological energy required to actually develop into an embryo.
Okay, so we've got the battery charged, the egg is powered up and protected, but a fully charged device is completely useless if the room it's sitting in is on fire.
That is a very apt metaphor.
Right, so we have to move from the egg itself to the environment it lives in, hormonal harmony. We're talking about PCOS and endometriosis.
Both of which are deeply intertwined with chronic inflammation.
So what does this all mean? Because I want to push back a little on the word inflammation here. It's become this, generic wellness buzzword. People hear it and think, oh, a swollen ankle, or, I eat some dairy and feel bloated.
Right, it sounds minor.
Yeah. But in reproductive health, chronic inflammation isn't just a little swelling, it's a literal fire in the body. It's a loud, blaring, systemic alarm system that actively prevents implantation.
I love that analogy. It's an immune system alarm. The body is constantly releasing inflammatory cytokines into the bloodstream.
And when that alarm is blaring, the body just can't hear the embryo trying to implant. It's a hostile environment.
Exactly. And this is where we get into targeted nutritional support. You aren't just taking vitamins, you are actively altering the body's inflammatory response. Take PCOS, for instance.
That's cystic ovary syndrome, right?
Yeah. PCOS is intimately linked with insulin resistance. The pancreas pumps out insulin to manage blood sugar, but the body's cells essentially ignore the signal, so it pumps out even more,
And that excess insulin floods down to the ovaries.
where it triggers a massive overproduction of testosterone. And that spike in androgens halts the follicle maturation. Ovulation just stops. The whole cycle is broken.
So how do we fix that without just putting someone on heavy pharmaceuticals? The source points to myo-inositol, right? Usually with D-chiroinositol.
Yes, myo-inositol acts as a secondary messenger for insulin. If the cell is ignoring the insulin knocking at the front door, myo-inositol essentially opens the side door.
Oh, wow. So it lowers the circulating insulin.
Exactly. It facilitates cellular glucose uptake. And by regulating that insulin, the testosterone drops, the alarm system quiets down, and ovulation can naturally restore itself.
And the text says this can perform as well as, or even better than, standard meds for PCOS, without the crazy gastrointestinal side effects.
It's incredibly effective. But we also have to talk about endometriosis and the structural tissue environment.
Right, which brings us to the fire extinguishers. Anti-inflammatories like omega-3s, DHA, and EPA.
Yeah, omega-3s actively dismantle those chemical markers of inflammation, and they act as vasodilators.
Meaning they improve blood flow to thicken the uterine lining. But wait, if there's oxidative stress actively damaging the tissue like with endometriomas, blood flow isn't enough, right?
No, it's not. The body needs to dismantle that damaged tissue using its own defense system, primarily glutathione.
But you can't just take a glutathione pill.
No, it gets destroyed in your digestive tract, which is why the protocol calls for NAC and acetylcysteine.
Okay, so NAC combats the oxidative stress.
Yes, because it provides the exact molecular raw materials, the sulfur bonds, for your body to synthesize its own glutathione internally.
You're handing your body the blueprints to build its own defense system, and it actually reduces endometrioma size. That is wild.
It physically combats the inflamed tissue, and then you layer in the essentials. Vitamin D, which is vital for hormone production and follicle development.
And vitamins E and folic acid to protect the cells and prevent birth defects. Okay, so mathematically, it feels like we've solved the puzzle for the female environment.
But there is a massive pivot here.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the source reveals that male factor infertility accounts for nearly 50% of all cases. Half.
This raises an important question, right? Why is male fertility so often treated as a secondary concern? We place almost the entire physical and financial burden on the woman.
The injections, the retrievals, the monitoring, it's intense.
It is, yet the male contribution is exactly 50% of the DNA. And the interventions for sperm are direct, measurable, and highly effective.
So let's talk about the sperm, because they have a single, very perilous job. I picture them as these tiny marathon runners going through a highly acidic, challenging environment.
Yes, and what do they need for that marathon? We are right back to CoQ10.
Oh, the crossover. CoQ10 is for both men and women.
Exactly. All of a sperm cell's mitochondria are tightly coiled in the midpiece, right at the base of the tail. CoQ10 provides the mitochondrial energy to whip that tail and propel it forward.
That's the motility. It's like their energy gel. But the engine needs actual fuel to burn, right?
Yes, and that is L-carnitine. Mitochondria burn fatty acids for energy, but those fatty acids can't just float in on their own. L-carnitine is the transport mechanism.
It's the shuttle bus, bringing the fuel directly to their engines.
Without the shuttle bus, the engine starves and the sperm stops moving. And the studies show L-carnitine directly enhances movement and count.
Okay, but sperm are also incredibly vulnerable, right? They're basically just naked DNA attached to a motor.
Yes, they carry almost no protective cytoplasm, so they are highly susceptible to oxidative stress.
Which is why the protocols emphasize antioxidants, vitamin C, E, and selenium. They act like a chemical shield.
Neutralizing the free radicals before they can cause DNA fragmentation. Because a sperm can swim fast, but if the DNA payload is shattered, the embryo won't develop.
Right, and then you add zinc and folic acid, working synergistically for testosterone production and the physical shape, the morphology of the sperm.
When you improve the speed, the shape, and the genetic integrity of the sperm, you drastically alter the probability of conception.
So knowing all these amazing tools exist, there is this huge temptation for you, the listener, to just run to the pharmacy and buy literally everything off the shelf.
Which is incredibly dangerous. The source explicitly warns against this. They call it supplement aisle roulette.
Yeah, we have to transition from what to take to how to take it safely, because the supplement market is basically the Wild West.
It is vastly unregulated. You might buy an over-the-counter CoQ10 that uses an unabsorbable isomer, or it's just packed with fillers.
So you could be taking L-carnitine every day, but your body's just filtering it out. You're just creating really expensive urine.
Exactly. A generic approach is totally counterproductive. It doesn't account for your body weight, your absorption rates, or your specific diagnosis. And random high doses can actually cause adverse interactions with other fertility meds.
Which is why the Berkeley Center pitches their specialized consultation. They do a $100 nationwide phone consult. You can call 212-685-0985 or visit berkeleycenter.com.
Because knowledge is only valuable when applied correctly. Clinical dosages and expert oversight are what separate an expensive placebo from an evidence-based medical intervention.
And economically, this just makes sense for you. Blindly buying random bottles of CoQ10 and NAC could easily cost $400 or $500, only to find out they were low quality. A $100 consult is not just medically essential, it's financially smart.
Plus, they prescribe exact personalized plans for eggs, sperm, lining, PCOS, endo.
And they offer a 10% discount on supplements bought through them after the consult, so it's a very targeted strategy.
You're supplying your body with the exact raw materials required to fix your specific mechanical failure.
Okay, so let's recap this whole journey. We went straight to the cellular level. We powered up the egg's battery with CoQ10.
We extinguished the inflammatory fires using myo-inositol for PCOS and NAC for endometriosis.
We brought the 50% male factor out of the shadows, giving sperm L-carnitine shuttle buses and antioxidant shields.
And we recognized the absolute necessity of a personalized, expert-guided plan to avoid supplement roulette.
The science can feel overwhelming, but you really don't need to be intimidated by it. The goal today was to hand you the actionable nuggets to feel empowered on your fertility journey.
Absolutely. Understanding the machinery gives you back your agency.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to ponder. Everything we've discussed from the source material focuses entirely on the physical environment, right? Physical inflammation, oxidative stress.
Yes, the body as a biochemical machine.
But we know how intimately connected the brain and the body are. We talked about physical inflammation acting like a blaring alarm system.
And the hypothalamus is exquisitely sensitive to alarm bells.
So how much might our psychological stress, the invisible inflammation of the mind, be impacting those exact same hormonal and mitochondrial pathways, the anxiety, the grief of the fertility journey?
It's a profound frontier. The chemistry of our emotional state alters the chemistry of our physical cells.
Just something to think about as you navigate the emotional environment of your journey alongside the physical one. Keep advocating for your cellular health, and we will catch you next time on The Deep Dive.